Hi, friends. Welcome to Bar of the Conference. I'm your host, Derek Scott III. We're in the middle of a two-part episode, The Long Journey Towards Inclusion with Randall Miller. Now, if you haven't had a chance, I invite you to go and listen to part one, where Randall unpacks for us some of the history around LGBTQ advocacy in the United Methodist Church. It was a great episode. In this part two, we're going to hear Randall talk about the One Church plan, and he's going to take us into the protocol room. If you recall, Randall was on the team that put together the proposal known as the Protocol for Reconciliation and Grace Through Separation. Again, so grateful for Randall's willingness to share so much. You'll find that he speaks for himself, but in doing that, he is not afraid to show us the complexity that has come with fighting for inclusion in our denomination. There have never been easy answers, and there's always been a need to stay in the conversation, even when it's been really hard. And so I continue to be grateful for Randall's courage, his resilience, and I do believe that he is going to see the fruit of his faithfulness over so many years. So, as I always tell you, grab that notebook, a choice beverage, and if you haven't listened to part one, go do that. And then let's listen together to part two of The Long Journey Towards Inclusion with Randall Miller. So Randall, yeah, I was on the floor of General Conference both in 16 and then in 19. And we had these plans that were put in front of us for General Conference 2019. And I'm just curious, I think I can make some assumptions about how you felt about the traditional plan.
Mm-hmm.
But the other two, and I think even the simple plan needs to be added in this conversation as well. What was your sense of these different approaches to try to get us to break that stalemate? And I think I guess the majority of us were pushing for the One Church plan. I don't know if that's true anymore. So I'd love for you to just kind of give us your thought, both when we were there in 2019 and now looking back on what's happened since on those plans.
Yeah. I think so just to remember the context and circumstances. So the One Church plan originated because Adam Hamilton and Tom Berlin and others, and there's a long story behind how it came to be that we don't have time to rehearse, but just no controversy abounds almost under every, and dissension abounds beyond every kind of major thing. But Adam Hamilton and Tom Berlin got up on the floor of the General Conference, and at the 2016 General Conference, am I right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And really said, that we need to find a way forward, and we need to think through what we're doing, and because what we're doing, battling it out at every General Conference is not working. And so we want to create this commission to take a look at to take a look at the options for our future, and come back and share, and bring something back to the General Conference that we can kind of look at and do. And so that was the start. And so we were not, we collectively, the progressive movement, the reconciling movement, LGBTQ people, were not invited to submit our names for the commission. I think they asked bishops who they wanted to put on the commission, including the LGBTQ folks.
Hmm.
And we didn't vote on who would represent us there. And so, in my mind, we came back with imperfect product. That was the one church plan
Hmm.
that rested on a slim hope that I was deeply skeptical of. And the slim hope was that people in the central conferences would go along, as well as conservatives, would go along with this because a commission of the church said that this was the right way to go, and that it contained compromises on all parts, on all sides. That that nobody got everything that they wanted, but it was a compromise where that we could live with, and it posed a solution for our present difficulties. So I'm not sure that I bought any of those arguments, even though I knew the people serving on the commission, the one church plan, and or the one church commission, or whatever it was called, commission of
Hmm.
church. Anyway, so but what I saw was that there was a really, really strong possibility that the conservative coalition could unite enough general conference delegates around the traditionalist plan that that it would pass. And for the first time, remember I talked about kind of being in this detente, where
Hmm.
for the first time we would move significantly more to the right,
Hmm.
and to a place that I thought was just intolerable. Like it was so close to, or it was a vision of the church that I could not belong to if the traditionalist plan passed,
Hmm.
because it's already intolerable in a way to be living in the context of the rules that we had on the books before the traditionalist plan. And just reading it, I thought, my God, for this is a bold move on their part to move us to the right, and not just incrementally, but significantly to move us as a denomination. And so, and on the other hand, the simple plan was the utopia plan. That's the plan, like, if I, in a perfect world, I would support the simple plan. And
Hmm.
because it accomplished everything that I wanted. I
Hmm.
I could have wanted some more flowery language around, marriage and stuff like that. But I also knew from many, many, many days of vote counting at General Conference that there would never be a time when we had the votes to pass the simple plan. So, and that was very clear to me, just as clear to me as the traditionalist thing, how evil the traditionalist plan was. And the challenge that we have around that is really that we are a church on several continents, and that the folks from the African continent are genuinely more culturally and religious conservative than we are. It doesn't mean that there isn't a LGBTQ movement happening on the African continent in many African countries. There is, and it's getting bigger and bigger. They have a much tougher road to go than we had in the US in terms of the heinous number of anti-LGBTQ plus laws in the African continent, and where most nation state governments are in terms of all of that. So, and we have had general conference after general conference for 20 years where people have said to me, this time there will be enough African delegates to vote for this that it will change. And it never has, and not in 20 years. And so, and that, as progressive folk, we have to struggle with what that means, that people that we are in fellowship with us are not naturally inclined to vote with us on LGBTQ plus issues. And I've traveled pretty extensively in Africa. I know that the WCA and the IRD are manipulators, but I also know there really is a genuine cultural and religious conservatism there that is akin to where the US was in the 1950s around these issues. So we're no better, we're just further down the road. So, and so what do you do? And so, and I'm a pragmatist, so I wish I was one of those folks who, rushed up a hill just because just because it was the right thing to do. I have rushed up that hill so many times over the last 35 years that my old bones are creaking now. And I've got to what's going to happen when I get up that hill? So I would never say that the one church plan was a good thing. It was compromise legislation that was given to us. I personally had no input into it, and I had a lot of critiques of what it said and of the trade-offs, and I did not believe what some commission members were telling me, that they had gotten significant commitments from folks in Africa and other places that they would support that. And at the same time, on the other hand, the good news people who had been at the table were openly saying they weren't going to support it and they were going to develop, so it's just like, but this is all we have because nobody, there's not time. We can't build a coalition quick enough to sort of counteract this, counteract the fact that it looks like an official church thing. And so, so all of that, it was a very flawed vehicle, but the only one that I could see that would stop the traditionalist plan from coming into being. And so that's why, and it's a tough sell to sell a pig in a poke to your folks who are aiming for liberation, because it's to prevent something else. And so that caused all sorts of difficulties. So that was my take on where we were. And so the fact that we, a bunch of us poured our lives and souls into fighting for the one church plan, even though it was a bunch of us at least considered to be deeply flawed, was very, very challenging. And I would say that those of us who did that organizing came away pretty wounded from the experience. Wounded in a way, we've been wounded in the past, but wounded deeper than we had been from other kinds of things. And we came away more realistic, more angry. Some folks who worked on that, and some of them who'd only done it, that was their only thing they'd done at General Conference. Completely burned out and not coming back and not wanting to give leadership to anything else because, that it was a pretty minimalist vision of a church future. And even that minimalist vision did not pass. So that all that not passing and then passing the traditionalist plan did all sorts of harms that the conservatives on their own had not managed to do to us in terms of recouping. So so that was my take on the one church plan. What can I say? Deeply flawed, but it was what we had.
Yeah, I appreciate that reflection, Randall, and I think so much happened on the floor of 2019 that that really. I asked Ian Uriola this question in a in the last episode was 2019 Holy Conferencing.
Mm-mm.
And my answer is that no, it wasn't. There were
Mm-mm.
decisions that were made,
Yeah.
but I cannot say that it was Holy Conferencing. And I'm sure there's somebody listening who's like, actually, Derek, like, that's cool. That's cool. You can have
Yeah.
your opinion there.
Yeah.
But I do wonder. I wonder. I actually, I think, I don't wonder. I think, and I believe that we will be unpacking what happened at 2019 for years to come.
Yeah.
Um, so let me move us along, because my degree is in history,
Yeah.
and I would sit here in all of these conversations
Yeah.
for a while. But I want to move us along because something interesting happened then at the end of 2019, as the annual conferences in the United States were responding to the passing of the traditional plan. That was its own thing, and at least in Florida, there was an effort to make sure that those who were delegated to do the work of General Conference in 2020 were people who were not interested in affirming the traditional plan and possibly even overturning it. And I'd love to know, to the degree that you can share, what do you think led to the formation of this group that would put together what we now affectionately call the protocol? Um, what happened? And grateful that you were in that space. But what happened to get us there, to that conversation?
Yeah, it really was happenstantial is the word I've used. So um, Bishop, so Bishop Yambasu, Bishop John Yambasu, who passed away shortly after, who was killed in an accident shortly after the protocol was released, really did have this vision of needing to do something to respond to the damage and harm that the 2019 General Conference had done. And I think, depending on your perspective, we all saw different reasons, had different perspectives on that harm. So when I was talking about the harm that it done, I was pretty clear about the harm that it caused to LGBTQ plus people. And I knew also that it had damaged the church's reputation, but I'm not here to rehabilitate the church's reputation, especially when the church is doing evil. So it's like,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can make you feel better about, church leaders standing up and saying perfectly horrendous things on TV and in the press. And then, people are rightly disgusted by it. And so that's not my job. Do the right thing, and you won't need to have like fix your reputation. But some people around the mediation table were really disturbed by the damage that was being done to the United Methodist Church's reputation and witness, and that was their primary thing. And the conservatives had their own take on the harm that it was done. That was not my take, but they had a sense that harm had been done and that the United Methodist Church had been damaged. Now, we found out, quickly into the early discussions that led to the mediation team that, they had a proposal for them to exit in their pockets and ready to go. So their lesson from the 2019 special session of the General Conference seemed to be it resolved the long-standing debate among conservative activists: shall we go or shall we stay? And it kind of showed the reaction after the traditionalist plan illustrated, I think, for some, that they could never control the United Methodist Church. And as I said before, that magnificent edifice of creating more and more rules is no longer effective if nobody is going to acknowledge the legitimacy of those policies.
yeah.
So Bishop Yambasu had this vision, and I think he and talked with it in the Central uh, uh, Conference's College of Bishops had conversation about it too, about what to do about this problem and how terrible the special session was. And Bishop Yambasu, I think, in talking with Tom Berlin, this is what I've surmised, um, pulled together an initial group just to come together informally to talk about what the special session had done and how to best address the harm that was done to the United Methodist Church and how to find a way forward that was obviously not the one church plan anymore. Very informal. And I really do believe this, so I haven't talked to Tom. There had been a kind of an email thread among those who were supporting the one church plan. What we call it, the one church committee or whatever, where, let us just say, some tense words were exchanged about the need for trust and for LGBT people in these kind of post traditionalist, post General Conference discussions that were happening for LGBT people to represent themselves and not be represented by moderates who had, a closer relationship to some of the conservatives. So it was pretty heated.
Yeah.
I confess to being directly involved in producing some of that heat. And so I have to believe that when a few days later, Bishop Yambasu asked, I think, Tom Berlin, who should be on this group that he was pulling together, Tom Berlin, having been in the conversation, said, "Oh, here's some people. you better put these people on." So it was first Jan and I for the LGBTQ plus community, and then we kind of said we need a third, and we were suggesting we didn't have any control over it as another thing where Bishop Yambasu was in for it. So he, of the 5 other names that we suggested to Bishop Yambasu, he then invited David Meredith to join. And so and it was, 3 people from, the Good News. Actually, it was more than that. It was 5 people from the progressive LGBTQ plus side, 5 people from the, the Good News WCA IRD coalition, and then 5 like bishops, I think, was the initial group. And we got together. And so it really was that whimsical. Like Bishop Yambasu pulled us together. We each had to pay our own way to come to the meeting. And this like a 2.5-day meeting. We had to pay for our own hotels. And I was like, I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't work for the church and I do not have a travel budget in mind because I'm not paid by a local church, nor am I a bishop. But and so we came together at Bishop Yambasu's invitation. We were clearly stuck at that meeting. So in the, the 2 days or whatever it was, we didn't make very much progress. And and by then, the conservatives were floating all of these kind of proposals around, perhaps leaving the church or getting their share of church resources and da 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 da. So we knew that was in the background. And so when we got there, really, we were stuck for a long time. And really, though, the one thing that we agreed on, not too far into the first meeting, was that schism was imminent, that that there was nothing that we could do to stop the schism, that we had irreconcilable differences, and nothing, maybe even Jesus coming back again, would be able to patch through those differences his space. And I really appreciated that kind of honesty from all sides, and that recognition that really after the special session in 2019, we were done, and there was not going to be, this is not what Bishop Yambasu wanted. It was no part of his vision for what would happen. He didn't, from what I could tell, he had not even considered that as a possible outcome of this informal meeting. Because he came from, Africa, and thus they don't have the same, or didn't have the same difficulties that we have in the US. So it did not occur to him it did not seem to occur to him that would be what we came out with, but that's where, the large majority was. And so out of that meeting, we created piecemeal, because there's no plan. We created, we designated a smaller group of people to come together to talk about, what that meant, and to do some mediation, and, build on this recognition that we could not live together anymore. And then we invited some more bishops into the conversation, and that was helpful because they helped us get organized. And early on, Bishop Bickerton said to us, we need a mediator. We're not going to be able to do this on our own. And so that's when we went out and found the mediator that we did. And so this then became a formal thing, except that we had no authority from the church. And the executive committee of the Council of Bishops even sent a message saying, we just want to remind you, you don't have any authority to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You're meeting on your own like any group in the church, but you do not have any official authority. And it's like, okay, we get that. And so then, but it became quasi-official because we had bishops and we had representatives from central conferences. In my mind, not enough. And that was raised with the central conference bishops, that perhaps we should have a few more people at the table, and I'll let them explain why they didn't feel as strongly as some of us did. And so we met, and it was hard slogging, I would just say that. And we had to build a certain level of trust with one another, and enough trust to stay at the table and to listen to each other's perspectives and opinions, and try and find a reasonable solution forward. And really, I think we had three meetings, maybe four. It didn't, the reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable solution, i.e. the beginnings of the protocol, really did not happen until the final meeting. So it was at a point where I think most of the progressives and some of the centrists had agreed that we were probably walking away from the table if this meeting didn't produce anything, because we were, we had heard it all. We'd heard the demands. We had made demands. We had responded. We'd shared perspectives, and it didn't seem like we were making much forward progress. And I remember writing to Bishop Bickerton and saying, I think that I will be stepping away from this table if we don't have something tangible.
Really?
So, because it really was, to me, it was like crawling through ground glass. And I think it was worse for me because I had been on the opposite side of the table with these same folks quadrennium after quadrennium. And they're like, yeah, we know each other and we don't trust each other. And I don't know that we can reach an agreement. But, we started talking about the possibility of, giving money to conservatives to support their creation of a new denomination. And once we arrived at that figure, 25 million, it opened the door. and we could negotiate other things. And there are some things that I wish, sometimes you put yourself at the table because you want to make sure that everything is on the up and up, and sort of a doubting Thomas thing. Like I want to no, I want my hands in this.
Yeah, I want to be in the room where it happens.
Yeah, and I could have been in the room, but I wasn't. And so some parts of the protocol were vaguer than I thought what we had committed to, particularly the stuff on regionalization and removal of the language. And if we weren't all wiped out by that time when we were writing this thing up, I would have really pushed harder to make that language, the language around removing the language, removing the language from the Book of Discipline once in the post separate. I would have codified that more and codified that moving into regionalizations. Now, I don't know that we would have gotten the conservatives to agree to that. But in retrospect, I wish I hadn't allowed them just to become almost like an afterthought in the protocol. So, because that, in my mind, that wasn't the nature of the agreements that we made, that was so far beneath in terms of level of importance that was like, so far below the other agreements that we made. So, but we were tired, and we were ready to sort of get this done, and we were focusing on it, the details of the separation, and there's a whole bunch of a lot of legislation behind all of that just is massive in terms of correcting the discipline to allow the separation. So and then the question was always to me, so we're going to sign this document. I'm going to sign in optimism and faith that everyone is going to live up to this document and this agreement. And it pretty quickly, because again, 35 years of watching things happen, it appeared to me that almost immediately people on the conservative side were violating the terms of the agreement, and in meetings that they were holding in Africa and elsewhere, they were disparaging the United Methodist Church. That was a mild term. And they were disparaging it to increase fear so that people would join the GMC. So it was like transparent and obvious. And then other things were said and done that kind of led me to believe that, oh, I see, we're not living up to all of the agreements that we made together in that room. So how much of this are we going to put up with before the protocol is fatally undermined? And then I think so that, and the protocol in my mind was in essence a backroom deal. We weren't hiding it or anything, but it wasn't the full democratic process that, for example, the General Conference promises for legislation of that significance. Even though we weren't controlling the General Conference, we weren't like democratically elected. Nobody but Bishop Yambasu selected us to be on that. We didn't poll the reconciling movement and ask who should be there. We didn't talk to the RMN's board of directors about who should be there. And so that is okay with me in a kind of urgent or emergency situation where something needs to be done, and General Conference is really just around the corner, right? Like it was supposed to be May 2020, and we're having discussions in November of 2019 and December. It's like, okay, this is like 5 months. But as the period grew longer, a backroom deal is never meant to hold up that long. So it would have been like 3.5 years before it actually came to the General Conference. That deal was never meant to hold out for 3.5 years. And the promises we made then, it's like, I don't know that the church has 25 million. It did in 2020, early 2020, before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it's going to have in 2024. So I don't know that we can give you 25 million. And certainly we can't give you 25 million and have the United Methodist Church struggling along, unable to support its ministries. And then also having someone calling the rest of us who are remaining in the United Methodist Church everything but a child of God.
Yeah, yeah.
And then expecting us, because it was common knowledge that to pass it, they needed some significant percentage of centrist and progressive delegates to vote for it. It's like, so you're calling me a child of Satan, and at the same time, you're saying publicly that you need us to support this for you to get it. It's like, to me, that's a very strange strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And so centrist and progressives, I think, reached the end of their rope with what was going on. And then, so it was just sort of like, yeah, you're doing everything you can to get out of the church earlier now that the General Conference has been delayed, but you still want us to maintain support for the protocol so it can be your plan like G. If all of your other shenanigans don't work out, you still want us to, in good faith, vote for the protocol. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. So,
well, we could. I mean, there's so many things that happened between January of 2020 when the protocol sort of, at least that's when I began to see the first kind of news about it, and to where we are now. But I'm a fast forward us all the way to sort of where we are now, Randall. And thank you. I mean, gosh, I'm going to ask you to come back on the show at some point because I've got 5,000 more questions for you. I want to hear your perspective. But, we're about a year and a half from General Conference 2024, which is actually the postponed 2020 General Conference. And there could be some changes to who we are as the United Methodist Church. What do you see? And we can do it in two different ways. What do you see coming for us at General Conference 2024? And maybe what do you hope to see both at 2024, but beyond that, as we're sort of ending this conversation?
Yeah, I think so. We're in that shakeup period. And I was telling a friend of mine that it really does feel like that scene in Gandhi where, in 24 hours, the partition between India and Pakistan is going to go up, and it's in the movie. It's just a mess. You just see people like hastening, with all of their possessions, scurrying to get across the partition line into their safe place before the deadline hits. And that's perhaps a bit of an exaggeration, but we're in this really messy period of the church leading up to the 2024 General Conference, where it is really hard to see or forecast what will happen. So, and because in many ways, I just say most of the structures and processes that we have set up over the years have failed us in this moment. They were clearly not designed for a time when the General Conference could not meet, where there was a global pandemic, where, people are leaving the United Methodist Church by no clean process, but kind of ripping themselves out of the United Methodist Church, where we don't have one institutional leader who is setting the strategy or the tone, like some of the other denominations. the person who has handled the schism has been their elected chief, whatever they
Yeah.
call that.
Yeah.
We don't have that. And
Right.
the president of the Council of Bishops has some of that authority, but not much of it. So
Mm.
we're just in this kind of unprecedented period. And I will say on the positive side, either 2000, the impact of 2019, or the moment just came, but we've had a generational change in the church, particularly among General Conference delegates. So
Mm-hmm.
the detente that we had before around issues was because delegates, the numbers of delegates were virtually stable in terms of voting for, voting against. For a long time now, there hasn't been any change. And in following the elections in 2020, following the special session of the General Conference, I refer to it as the United Methodist Spring, because all of a sudden a bunch of people got elected who are looking for a change
Right.
in policies. And, there was a long, long time where I would say a good 20 years where I was the only openly gay delegate, queer delegate on the floor of General Conference. And now we have an abundance of queer delegates on the floor, which is like, just yesterday, it was one or two at most.
Mm.
We didn't caucus together. So,
Mm.
so there really has been this change that has happened that honestly I did not expect to see. I was thinking to myself, well, my time in activism in the United Methodist Church will have come and gone, and we will have, collectively done some important things, but that change in sort of removing the policies won't come while I'm sort of actively working to reform the church. So depending on which way this messy shakeout goes, we could be on the verge of being able to remove the harmful language that's in the discipline. And that could happen through a variety of ways. It could be the General Conference, that there are enough votes at the General Conference to do it. It could be that, through regionalization, the U.S. regional group, it's been pretty clear that the majority of U.S. delegates for some time, if left to our own devices, would have removed the language. And that's been like for at least 10 or 12 years, that if there was a regional conference and delegates had the authority to move, at least in the US, we would remove the harmful language. And so that's another possibility. So we are, on the other hand, it may be that with the loss of with enough churches in the U.S. portion of the church, the balance of delegates in General Conference would have shifted, and there are more people from places in Africa and more conservative places outside the U.S., and that they might, hold the majority of votes at some point time soon, and that that would mean that we were entering into a new phase of really direct conversations with African church leaders about what the future holds for our denomination. And so, there are a number of possible pathways forward. And it's really hard to tell at this particular moment what can happen, what we'll be able to achieve at the 2024 General Conference. I will say that the conservative coalition that has long controlled the majority block of delegates at General Conference has been badly wounded, and with churches disaffiliating, is quickly losing the influence that they once had. And so the question is, is that influence, particularly in controlling votes, is that dwindling fast enough to make help us make changes at this general conference, or really, will it be this messy thing where some Global Methodist Church affiliated delegates who are still in the United Methodist Church are still there, kind of mucking things up in terms of the future of the United Methodist Church. So we really don't know. And as someone said in an earlier meeting, it's possible, I guess, that the General Conference, I don't think the protocol, which is still before the General Conference, I don't think it will pass. I don't think it has enough votes to pass. And there are enough objections, particularly in Africa, about it, that I just don't think it has the votes to pass. But it could be that the General Conference comes up with another agreement, about how conservatives would leave, and that would, in some ways, if that was an item that came up early on in General Conference, that could lead to clearing the floor of those who really are affiliated with the GMC by voluntarily clearing the floor, and we could move more quickly into who we want to be as the United Methodist Church. So there are all these possibilities, and we're just at this point where it's a little muddy and messy to tell what's going on right now.
Randall, thank you so much for this. Thank you for your continued work. And my prayer is that you would see the fruit of your labors as relates to the United Methodist Church and the inclusion of LGBTQ individuals. I pray that you would continue to see the fruit of all that you've invested.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I just want to say I have invested a lot, and it's been collective investment that I would not have been able to stay around if there were not sort of this loving group of friends who we have sometimes chafed at each other, but have stayed together and plotted and conspired and consoled each other over the years. So, and I do hope to see the change in rules and policies. But I also am deeply moved, and this influx of new leaders. There are a number of Black, younger, and queer folk, younger than I, queer folk taking the reins, and that
we out here.
So I'm like, that is the answer to prayer, because then you can really leave knowing that you are passing the torch on to some really excellent people who will do it differently, have different perspectives. And that to me is a great, great, great joy.
We hope you enjoyed the episode. Bar of the Conference is produced by the team at Wesley Survival, a ministry of Studio Wesley. Subscribe to this show on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, or Google platforms so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.